file, she exposed a 9-year pattern of biased rulings by Judge Hannah Dugan, including secretly reducing sentences for friends and shielding undocumented immigrants from ICE. The room shifted from tears to disbelief as Dugan, once hailed for compassion, was left speechless and cornered by the facts. This wasn't just a legal takedown. It was a live dissection of a judge who used mercy as a mask for misconduct. But what did Jasmine say that made even Congress stop breathing? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. The chamber pulsed with silent dread. Lights glared overhead like interrogation lamps. Cameras blinked red in every corner, unblinking, unmerciful. Reporters perched on the edge of their seats, hands hovering over keyboards like snipers waiting for a signal. Lawmakers exchanged glances, some wary, some already sharpening their knives behind folded hands. ICE agents lined the sidewall in stiff formation, their uniforms crisp, expressions blank. Civil rights observers packed the rear, jaws clenched, arms crossed. Every breath in the room felt borrowed. This wasn't just a hearing. It was a pressure cooker seconds from rupture. Then came her voice, low, steady, lethal. Jasmine Crockett didn't stride in. She sliced through the tension like a scalpel. No theatrics, no anger, just a terrifying calm. She placed her notes down with surgical precision and looked straight ahead. "We're not here to destroy a name," she said, every word landing like a hammer in a quiet church. "We're here to defend the rule of law, or admit it's meaningless." Her voice didn't need volume. It had gravity. The room stilled. Pens stopped. Chairs didn't creak. Even the ICE agents leaned ever so slightly forward. It was the kind of silence that didn't happen in government buildings, the kind that meant something was about to break. And then all eyes turned. Slowly, collectively, the entire chamber swiveled toward the witness chair. There sat Judge Hannah Dugan, once the one who gave the verdicts. Now she was the one waiting for one. And just like that, the room shifted. From watching Jasmine to watching the woman who once held the gavel. The silence thickened, not with awe, but with the weight of what was about to be said. Judge Hannah Dugan stood slowly. No robe, no elevated bench. Just a black blazer and a face that had aged more in the last week than in the last 5 years. She walked to the witness table with quiet dignity, the kind that doesn't beg for sympathy but still demands respect. Every footstep echoed like a countdown. The air was tighter now, like the oxygen had been measured and rationed. Jasmine didn't move. ICE agents watched with clenched jaws. The civil rights lawyers leaned in, waiting to see if the woman some once admired would fold or burn. A clerk swore her in. Her right hand rose without hesitation, and when she sat down, she didn't adjust the mic or clear her throat. She just spoke. "Yes," she said with eyes steady. "I instructed my bailiff to open the west corridor." The admission dropped like a hammer, sharp and final. "Yes, I knew federal officers were waiting outside. Yes, I knew they were there for Mr. Ortega. And yes, I made a decision to help him leave through another door." No lawyer present could miss what she was doing. She wasn't fighting the accusation. She was owning it, but not to surrender, to make a point. She leaned forward slightly, her voice calm but pointed, like someone reading a verdict only she understood. "I made an ethical choice in a moment that lacked basic humanity. That's not a mistake. That's what conscience looks like when the law forgets how to feel." No apology, no excuse. Just belief, raw and absolute. Around her, pens began to move again. Journalists caught the phrasing, but the room still hadn't recovered. And then came the line that froze everything in place. "I don't regret it," she said. "I'm not here to plead for forgiveness. I'm here because I did what the law wouldn't." The room didn't explode. It just tightened. Jasmine's face didn't change, but her hand, unseen beneath the desk, curled slowly into a fist. Because now she knew. This wouldn't be a hearing. This would be a war of definitions, between law and conscience, order and mercy, and it had just begun. And that's when Jasmine leaned forward, slow, deliberate, as if the calm in her voice might be the most dangerous weapon in the room. She had listened. She had allowed the silence after Dugan's final words to stretch, like a wire pulled taut, waiting to snap. But now it was her turn, and the air shifted again. No outrage, no dramatics, just precision. She reached for a folder stamped with the seal of the Department of Justice and opened it without looking down. Her eyes were locked on Dugan's, and her voice was surgical. Title 8, Section 1324 of the U.S. Code, she began, each syllable clear as steel. It is a federal crime to knowingly harbor or shield an undocumented individual from detection or apprehension by federal authorities. She let that sentence sit, not like a hammer, but like a hook. You may call it compassion, Judge Dugan, but the law calls it obstruction. Around the room, you could feel the tension coil again. Some lawmakers shifted in their seats. A few ICE officials finally blinked. The temperature hadn't changed, but the hearing felt colder. Jasmine flipped a page, her fingertips steady. Let me remind the committee of 3 prior incidents in which interference with federal enforcement inside a courthouse resulted in serious consequences. Her voice didn't rise, but the weight of her words grew heavier. 2018, San Francisco. A local magistrate delayed ICE officers from detaining a man with a violent criminal record. He vanished. Days later, he was arrested for attempted murder. 2021, New York. An immigration judge ordered courtroom doors locked during a federal raid. That same day, an ICE agent was assaulted outside the building by the man they failed to apprehend. Jasmine paused, just long enough. In 2022, right here in Wisconsin, a courthouse exit was blocked to prevent an ICE pickup. That agent later testified under oath that he feared for his safety due to what he described as judicial interference. She snapped the folder closed with one hand. We are not dealing with abstractions, she said, voice still calm, but unmistakably harder now. This isn't about feelings. This is about precedent and consequence and the principle that no judge, however well-meaning, is above the structure of law. The words echoed with more force than volume. The chamber had gone still again. Jasmine turned her gaze back to Dugan, and what came next was not an accusation. It was a narrowing, a tightening of the lens. You made a choice, Judge Dugan, a personal one, but you made it from a bench built by the Constitution. That bench is not yours to rewrite. That hallway you opened wasn't a shortcut to justice. It was an exit from accountability. Dugan didn't flinch. She didn't blink. But something behind her eyes shifted, almost imperceptibly, a hairline fracture in the foundation of certainty. And yet, she answered without hesitation, voice quiet but firm. I know what I did, she said, and I would do it again. Her hands rested on the table, palms down, no trembling. Because I chose people over procedure. I chose human dignity over a system that forgot how to see it. There was no apology in her voice, no regret. But this time, her words didn't command the room. They defended a corner of it, and Jasmine stepped into the center of that space, not to destroy it, but to expose what it cost. But Dugan didn't retreat. She didn't counter with statutes or case law. She reached for something older, more primal. The chamber was still thick with the aftermath of Jasmine's legal volley, when Dugan leaned forward, placing her hands flat on the witness table. Her voice dropped, not in volume, but in tone, stripped of defiance, stripped of defense. What remained was raw, almost too human for the courtroom. Luis Ortega was not a criminal, she began. He wasn't fleeing charges. He wasn't armed. He wasn't hiding. She looked straight ahead, not at Jasmine this time, but beyond her, into the faces of the lawmakers, the press, the stone-faced ICE officers. He was a father, a quiet man who worked 2 jobs and still walked his kids to school when he could. His wife is a nurse who worked through the height of the pandemic. She wore garbage bags when there weren't enough gowns. A few heads turned, a few pens slowed. They paid taxes. They followed every requirement their status allowed. They were waiting for a court date, a chance to stay. But that day, ICE wasn't waiting to hear their case. They were waiting to end it. Dugan's voice didn't tremble, but the weight behind it cracked something open in the room. Luis looked at me before I recessed that hearing, she said, her fingers curling slightly on the table. Not with fear, with understanding. He knew the law wouldn't see him. It would process him, package him, ship him. His kids were 6, 8, and 10. That morning, he braided his daughter's hair before court. He kissed his wife on the forehead and promised he'd be home for dinner. Her voice paused, the silence screaming in the gaps. He never would have made it out the front door. One congresswoman to the left lowered her head. A senator shifted in his seat, his eyes glassy. The air wasn't just still now, it was fragile. If saving a father is wrong, Dugan said, eyes unwavering, then the law must answer to its own cruelty. The moment sat heavy. Reporters hesitated to type, afraid the keys might shatter it. On the far end of the chamber, someone sniffled. Another cleared their throat too loudly, as if to mask emotion they didn't want to own. The ICE agents remained stoic, but even they weren't breathing as easily. The story had landed. It hadn't just painted Luis Ortega as a man, it had painted everyone else in the room as human too. That was Dugan's skill, not in argument, but in memory. She didn't plead, she resurrected. And for a split second, it felt like she had taken the moral high ground back. But Jasmine didn't let the chamber drown in sympathy. She let it breathe just long enough, then struck. With slow precision, she reached into her briefcase and pulled out a thick manila folder, marked with no seal, no government label, just one word in block letters, confidential. The air shifted again. Chairs creaked. Reporters leaned forward as if instinctively drawn to blood in the water. Jasmine held the file like a weapon, her fingers tight around the edges. She didn't wave it. She didn't raise her voice. She simply opened it, revealing a stack of internal memos, handwritten annotations, redacted summaries, and inter-office email chains. Dates, docket numbers, rulings all tied to one name, Judge Hannah Dugan. She began reading. Case 14702, charges dropped without prosecutorial consent. No explanation entered into the record. Flip. Case 16-883, defendant, personal acquaintance of the court, received probation for a second DUI offense despite mandatory minimum guidelines. Flip. Case 19-021, closed-door sentencing. No documentation provided to the Judicial Review Committee in violation of Wisconsin court reporting standards. Flip, flip, flip. With every page turned, the sound grew heavier, like steel being laid on stone. I have here, Jasmine continued, her voice calm but surgical, more than 24 cases over the last 8 years where your courtroom decisions bypassed legal standards. Some were never reported, some were quietly erased, but all bear one thing in common. They favored people you knew, or people who could help you. She looked up, her stare like a sniper scope, and none of them were Luis Ortega. Dugan didn't move, but the breath in her chest seemed to stall. Her fingers, once neatly clasped, twitched against the table. She tried to speak, but Jasmine wasn't done. You say you acted out of compassion, she continued, but where was that compassion when the defendant was a teenage girl with no priors and no family? You sentenced her to 6 months for shoplifting. Another page flipped. Where was that compassion when a black man with no attorney missed a hearing because of a hospital stay? You signed a bench warrant, and he spent 3 nights in holding. Another. Yet when a former assistant district attorney's son crashed into a parked car while intoxicated, you quietly had the charge reclassified as reckless driving and sealed the file. The silence that followed was suffocating. The room wasn't moved anymore. It was cornered. Every eye that had glistened moments ago was now narrowed. Jasmine leaned in, folding her hands over the open file, her voice a low knife. This isn't about Luis Ortega. This is about your pattern, your choices, the way you wrapped favoritism in velvet and called it mercy. She pushed the file slightly forward on the desk, just far enough for everyone in the room to know it existed, and that it was damning. You didn't defy the law once. You built a shadow court beneath it. She let the words hang there, heavy and irreversible. Dugan looked stunned, only slightly, but to those who knew courtroom rhythm, it was enough. A hesitation, a skipped breath, a flicker of fight replaced by something close to calculation. Jasmine sat back slightly, her posture still as marble. So, Judge Dugan, she asked, her voice smooth, final, and loaded with iron, when exactly did compassion give you the right to hide your own pattern of abuse? There it was, the cut that landed deeper than all before it. No rebuttal, no file in Dugan's hands. Just silence, and the slow, terrifying realization that the very thing she had weaponized to defend herself was now being used to undo her completely. Compassion had a cost, and Jasmine Crockett had just sent the bill. The silence that followed Jasmine's last question was thick enough to choke on, but she didn't leave space for Dugan to recover. She moved in, not with volume, but with precision, her tone tighter, her delivery faster, like a prosecutor peeling off gloves and going bare knuckle. "Let's talk about patterns," she said, voice cool as glass. "Because if this is about compassion, then compassion should be consistent, predictable, blind." Her eyes stayed locked on Dugan's, but her voice aimed at the entire room. "Why, Judge Dugan, does your mercy seem to know faces and names? Why does it stretch wide for a wealthy financial advisor from Waukesha with multiple fraud charges, but slam shut on a teen immigrant caught selling vape pens at a high school lunch table?" She didn't blink. "Why does a friend of the family walk free with deferred prosecution, while a woman fleeing domestic violence gets 30 days for missing a court date?" The questions came like body blows, fast, unrelenting, and exact. Jasmine leaned closer now, not to intimidate, but to corner. "You say you opened a door for Luis Ortega out of conscience. Fine. But where was that conscience when ICE came for Fatima Rezai, a refugee mother who'd been in your courtroom 2 months earlier? She was arrested in the parking lot. You saw her crying in the hallway. You said nothing." Jasmine flipped another document, a photo clipped to the top. "Where was your compassion when a disabled Iraq veteran, a naturalized citizen, was dragged out by ICE after you ignored his attorney's request for a motion delay? He missed a brain scan scheduled that week. He collapsed in custody." The room wasn't breathing anymore. Jasmine's voice didn't need to rise. It slashed just as hard in a whisper. She let the silence stretch now, but this time she controlled it. Then, with the slow cadence of someone nailing the final plank on a coffin, she asked, "Tell us, Judge, what exactly was your system? Who got mercy? Who got silence? And why did so many people in need never find the door you claim to have opened?" Her hands rested lightly on the table, but her words hit like a gavel. "Because from here, it doesn't look like compassion. It looks like access." And in that moment, Dugan didn't seem like a judge. She looked like a gatekeeper caught holding keys she wasn't supposed to have. The shift in the room was slow, but unmistakable. A few minutes earlier, Judge Hannah Dugan had the entire chamber leaning in, eyes soft, shoulders dropped, hearts cracked open by the story of a father and his 3 children. But now, after Jasmine's pointed questions and the weight of the evidence laid bare, that warmth was gone. The silence wasn't reverent anymore. It was suspicious, and Dugan could feel it pressing in on her like a closing door. She tried to steady herself, straightened her back, lifted her chin, but her voice, when it came, didn't carry the authority it once had. I made the decisions I believed were right at the time," she said. It was the kind of sentence meant to sound firm, but came out soft, like a crack in glass. Her hands, which had been so still before, now moved nervously, adjusting a sleeve, brushing the table, gripping the edge of her chair. "Not every case is the same," she continued, eyes darting from one face to another. "There are things you don't always see in the paperwork, details, circumstances." She was rambling now, trying to fill space she used to control. "When you're on the bench, sometimes you have to make calls that feel right in the moment," she said, but her voice shook on the word right. "I didn't favor anyone. I looked at who they were, what they were facing, and she paused, took a breath. "I tried to use judgment. Isn't that what being a judge is about?" Her tone was pleading now, not powerful, but the room didn't answer. Lawmakers looked down at their notes. Reporters stopped typing, not out of respect, but because there was nothing sharp left to catch. Even the ICE agents, unmoved before, now seemed more alert, less neutral. The mood had shifted from emotion to calculation, from empathy to doubt. Dugan tried one last time. "I didn't open any back door for friends," she said quickly. "I mean, yes, some people I knew came before me in court, but I didn't treat them differently. I swear I didn't." Her voice caught slightly, and that catch, more than anything she said, rang loudest in the silence. And still, Jasmine said nothing. She just sat, calm, composed, watching Dugan unravel in front of everyone. Because sometimes the truth doesn't have to be shouted. Sometimes you just let someone keep talking until their own words bury them. But Jasmine wasn't done. She had let the silence hang just long enough to let the discomfort grow. Then she reached forward, slow, steady, and picked up a second folder from her desk. It was thinner than the last, marked only with a red tab. "Let me make this simple," she said. Her voice was calm, but everyone in the room knew what was coming next. "This isn't my opinion. This is data, verified. Federal." She opened the folder slowly. Even the sound of paper shifting felt loud. "According to records from the Federal Judicial Review Program," she began, her eyes fixed on the witness table, 87% of Judge Dugan's lenient rulings in the last 8 years were given to people with either personal or professional connections to her. She let that number settle. 87%, she repeated sharper this time. "That's not coincidence. That's a pattern." Lawmakers stirred. A few froze mid-note. The warmth that had once filled the chamber had been replaced by something colder, heavier. "Let's call it what it is," Jasmine continued. "It wasn't compassion. It was connection." Dugan didn't respond. Her hands were still folded, but now her fingers were knotted tight. Jasmine reached again into the folder and lifted a small digital recorder. "I'll now enter into the record an audio statement collected during an internal review by courthouse staff," she said. The speaker is a long-serving court clerk from Milwaukee County. She worked under Judge Dugan for over a decade. She pressed play. A quiet voice filled the room, steady, tired, and real. "She didn't do it out of kindness," the woman said. "She did it because she owed them. She felt she had to pay people back. Friends from the DA's office, old allies, people who helped her rise." Click. The playback ended, but the weight of those words stayed. Dugan didn't say a word. Her mouth opened slightly, but nothing came out. She wasn't nodding. She wasn't shaking her head, just staring at the table, frozen in place. The judge who once commanded a courtroom now looked like someone trying not to collapse inside her own skin. Her shoulders rose, then fell, slowly. Still, no response. Jasmine leaned in, not to attack, but to finish what she had started. Her voice lowered, almost like she was speaking one-on-one. "This was never just about Luis Ortega," she said. "It wasn't just one door you opened." She paused. "You built an entire hallway for the people you knew, and you locked it to the rest." She sat back, silent again. The room didn't explode. It didn't have to. Every person inside already understood what had just happened. The chamber didn't move. Not a breath. Not a cough. Not even the sound of a pen scratching paper. The folder was still open in front of Jasmine, its pages exposed like wounds. Across the room, Judge Dugan sat motionless, her hands clasped too tightly, her knuckles pale. Her gaze didn't lift from the table. She didn't blink, didn't flinch. The woman who had once commanded silence now seemed afraid of it. The chair of the committee, a silver-haired congressman from Illinois, cleared his throat softly. It was the only sound in the room. "Judge Dugan," he said, voice calm but firm, "do you have any response to the data presented?" His words hung in the air like a challenge, polite but impossible to ignore. Dugan didn't answer. She didn't look up. Her eyes stayed locked on the grain of the wood before her, as if the answers were hidden somewhere in its grooves. Seconds passed. 1, 2, 5. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came. For the first time in the entire hearing, she had no language left. The chair gave her space. But still nothing. A few heads turned toward Jasmine, expecting her to press the advantage, to strike again. But she didn't. She didn't need to. Instead, she sat forward, folding her hands calmly on the table. And when she spoke, her voice was so quiet it almost didn't belong to a courtroom. But it cut through the room like steel. "That silence," she said, steady and clear, "speaks louder than any ruling you've ever signed. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't performative. It was surgical truth. Clean, undeniable." The air shifted, no longer tense but final. Like a room where the verdict had already arrived, even if no one had spoken it out loud. Dugan didn't argue. She didn't protest. She didn't defend. She just sat there, shoulders curled inward, ever so slightly, her eyes distant. Whatever was behind them, rage, grief, regret, it never made it to the surface. Only silence did. And somehow, that was louder than anything she could have said. The committee chair exhaled slowly and looked down at his notes. He didn't speak again. Around him, lawmakers who had earlier nodded at Dugan's pleas now looked blank. Neutral. Cold. A few shuffled their papers without purpose. One took off their glasses and began to clean them, just for something to do. The weight of what had just happened made everyone want to move, do anything but meet her eyes. Reporters, who had once been scribbling furiously, now paused. One slowly capped their pen. Another leaned back in their chair and looked at the ceiling like they needed a second to process what they'd just seen. Even the ICE agents, who had maintained blank, unreadable stares throughout the day, seemed to lean forward ever so slightly, as if taking note not of a criminal, but a collapse. Judge Hannah Dugan didn't cry. She didn't speak. She just sat there, no longer the center of the room, but the outline of something that used to be. Jasmine didn't smile. She didn't gloat. There was no pleasure in this moment, only weight, only the cold understanding of what accountability looks like when all the excuses run out. She let the silence continue, because she knew that sometimes silence is not absence. It's impact. It's truth sitting in the space where a lie once tried to stand. And in that silence, everyone understood. There would be no rescue, no final defense. Dugan had come to this hearing believing she could justify what she had done, that if she told the right story, crafted the right moment, people would understand, forgive, forget. But that story had unraveled. The moments had turned against her. And now the one thing that had once made her powerful, her voice, had abandoned her completely. The room remained still for a long beat. No one came to her defense. Not one lawmaker cleared their throat to break the tension. Not one former colleague rose to say she was misunderstood. Whatever support Dugan had carried into the chamber had been stripped down, inch by inch, and now there was nothing left to protect her but silence. The chair tapped his pen once on the desk. Soft, slow, final. "This hearing will continue," he said quietly, but with finality. "But it appears we've heard all we needed to." And with that, he moved on. But the rest of the room, it would stay in that moment a little longer, frozen in the quiet downfall of a woman who had once stood above the law, and now sat alone beneath its weight. The silence inside the hearing chamber was no longer just silence. It had become something heavier, like fog in a locked room. Even breathing felt like a choice. After everything that had been said, after the data, the recording, and Jasmine's final quiet blow, there was nothing more to argue. The air didn't crack. It didn't shatter. It simply waited, like the space before a final note. And then slowly, Judge Hannah Dugan moved. She didn't ask to speak. She didn't wait for permission. Her hand rose from the desk like something weighted, something that had been holding still for far too long. She reached toward the microphone, hesitating for half a breath. Her fingers trembled, not from fear, but from knowing this moment would end everything she had spent a life building. The microphone clicked softly as she leaned forward. Her eyes didn't lift. Her mouth barely moved. But her voice, low, steady, plain, filled the chamber. "I resign," she said. 2 words, no buildup, no preamble, just the kind of truth that doesn't need drama to carry weight. She didn't lift her head. She didn't justify it. There was no official statement, no carefully crafted legal defense, no final appeal to empathy. She didn't offer excuses because there were none left to give. She had been a judge for over 20 years. But in that moment, she wasn't a judge. She was just a woman at the end of something too broken to fix. The room didn't react. Not right away. It couldn't. It was as if everyone had just heard something they didn't know they were waiting for. Something that had been crawling beneath the floor of the hearing since the first word was spoken. And then she looked up. Not at the chairman, not at the cameras, at Jasmine. Their eyes met. Steady, level, unflinching. Not a glare, not a plea. Just a moment of shared awareness. 2 women from 2 different worlds who had crossed in this room for a reason neither of them had chosen, but both had followed through. And then Dugan spoke again, only once. Congresswoman Crockett, she said softly, her voice carrying no force, no judgment, only truth. I thought I was serving justice. I was serving myself. That was it. No more lines, no tears, no emotion curling the ends of her voice. Just the hardest thing a person in power can admit. Not that they failed, but that they convinced themselves they hadn't. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of everything that had been exposed, everything that had been torn down, and nothing else needed to be said. Jasmine didn't smile. She didn't move. For a second, she just looked at Dugan, face calm, hands still on the table. No gloating, no satisfaction. She had asked the questions. She had pushed. But this wasn't a victory. Not for her, not for anyone. It was something colder, something deeper, the closing of a door that should have been closed a long time ago. Then she dropped her gaze and slowly began gathering her materials, one folder at a time. No rush, no performance, just the quiet, careful movement of someone putting truth back into its container. She stacked her documents, closed her notebook, clicked her pen. Everything was precise, respectful, but final. She didn't look at the crowd. She didn't look at the cameras. She wasn't waiting for recognition. She wasn't waiting for anything. Behind her, the room remained motionless. A lawmaker rubbed their forehead. Another tapped a pen but didn't write. Someone cleared their throats softly, more out of instinct than need. No one said a word to defend Dugan. No one reached for her as she pushed back her chair. And when she stood, she didn't straighten her back or raise her chin. She didn't reclaim authority. She didn't try to look proud. She just stood, tired, older, smaller than when the hearing began. She turned without a glance, without a wave, and walked slowly down the center aisle. Alone. She didn't look back. She didn't have to. She had brought the full weight of her career into that room, and it had collapsed under the weight of her own truth. And still, Jasmine said nothing. She didn't even watch her leave. She simply lowered her hands into her lap. The papers now folded, the file closed, the job, however painful, done. There was no applause, no sound. Because when justice truly lands, it doesn't roar. It settles, quiet, unmistakable, and permanent. The door clicked shut behind Judge Dugan, but the weight of her absence lingered like smoke after a fire. For a few long seconds, the chamber stood still, not in reverence, but in processing. The silence wasn't hollow. It was stunned. The fall they had just witnessed wasn't noisy or violent. It was quiet, devastating, and it had landed on every person in the room. Jasmine Crockett remained seated at the witness table. Her hands were folded, her notes neatly stacked, her posture still. The job was done, but justice never felt clean. It felt like a wound that stops bleeding only because it has bled enough. Slowly she stood. There was no rustle of applause, no movement, just the sound of her chair sliding back into place. A small, final sound in a room full of unspoken truths. She walked calmly toward the committee panel, her heels echoing lightly on the polished floor. Her pace was even, controlled. Every step was weighted with the truth she had dragged out into daylight over the past 4 hours. As she approached the microphone again, the press leaned in. Lawmakers braced themselves. Some instinctively sat straighter. The weight was shifting, away from what had fallen and toward what still stood. Jasmine didn't pause long. She didn't look for effect. She didn't need to. When power chooses favorites, she said, her voice clear, firm, it stops serving the people. The sentence dropped like a stone into still water. No echo, no frills, just impact. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her calmness was its own kind of authority, and every person in the chamber knew it. She glanced once around the room, not for praise, but for confirmation that what had been exposed was not just seen, but understood. She continued, "The law is not a door we open for those we like. It's the same door for everyone. Simple, devastating, complete." And that was all she said. A second passed, then another, and then the room erupted, not from lawmakers or officials, but from the people. In the back of the chamber, A ripple of applause broke free, first hesitant, then firm, then louder. Reporters who had spent the last hours scribbling notes now lifted their heads and clapped. Staffers from civil rights organizations, silent until now, stood and joined them. The gallery didn't explode into cheers. It rose in respect. Applause not for a performance, but for a truth that had landed. The chairman didn't stop it. He didn't try. For the first time that day, he smiled. Faint, tired, but real. Cameras flashed, phones recorded, journalists typed headlines in real time. Crockett redefines the bench, the fall of Dugan, the rise of accountability, a door for everyone. Jasmine's final words echo through Congress, but Jasmine didn't bask in it. She simply stepped back from the microphone and returned to her seat. Her shoulders relaxed, but her face stayed focused. For her, this wasn't the end of a hearing. It was the beginning of what had to follow. Because justice, real justice, doesn't end with applause. It begins with what happens after it. She glanced once more at the empty seat where Judge Dugan had sat. It was still warm, and now it belonged to history. It didn't take long. Before Jasmine had even made it home that evening, the hearing footage had already gone viral. Clips from C-SPAN and phone recordings flooded social media, edited and amplified with overlays, quotes, and slow-motion loops of one moment. Judge Dugan saying, "I thought I was serving justice. I was serving myself." It was everywhere. Primetime news anchors were cutting their planned segments to show the hearing in full. Editorials were being rewritten in real time. The world had just seen something rare, a powerful figure fall not from indictment, not from scandal, but from the quiet collapse of her own justification. But it wasn't Dugan who dominated the headlines. It was Jasmine Crockett. Her final line was on every screen. "The law is not a door we open for those we like. It's the same door for everyone." The words weren't dramatic. They were devastating in their simplicity. A few thousand tweets quoted her within the hour, a few million followed by sunrise. Someone stenciled it in spray paint on the side of a courthouse in Detroit by noon. T-shirts, pins, posters. She didn't ask for it, but it came anyway, like a wave cresting over the political shoreline. News outlets lined up instantly. MSNBC ran the chyron. Crockett delivers the gavel strike heard round the country. CNN ran a split screen of Jasmine and Dugan, titling it, "The Reckoning at the Bench." Meanwhile, conservative media fired back with force. Fox News called it a witch trial in a pantsuit. One host warned, "If unelected staffers like Crockett can tear down a judge with a few sentences, no one in power is safe." There were calls for ethics reviews, ironically of Jasmine, but public momentum didn't swing their way. Outside the Capitol, supporters had already gathered with signs. "Justice has a new voice. One door, one law." A mother held her daughter's hand and whispered, "That's what standing your ground looks like." For a moment, just a moment, truth didn't feel like a lonely thing. It felt shared. Still, not all the reactions came with cheers. In committee back rooms and private caucus halls, conversations turned colder. Jasmine had stepped on nerves, powerful nerves. Some of her own colleagues who had smiled quietly during the hearing now avoided her in quarters. A senior Democrat leaned in during a hallway vote and said in a low voice, "You made waves, just don't drown in them." She said nothing back, not because she didn't have a response, but because she had heard that tone before. Some wanted her quiet, others wanted her louder, but she wasn't changing either way. She kept walking. That weekend, she received over 6,000 emails. Her team had to disable her public voicemail inbox by Friday night. The words varied, but the message echoed. "I saw you. You gave us a voice. My daughter wants to be you. My son finally believes the system can change. Thank you for showing the law still matters." But with the praise came another layer Jasmine knew well. The weight. Because being right in a moment doesn't mean you get to walk away from what follows. It means you have to walk deeper into it. The headlines wouldn't last. The attention would move. But the wound they had opened, that would stay. So would the responsibility to make sure it healed right. By Sunday, she was back in her district. The local church invited her to speak. She declined. Not out of pride, out of exhaustion. Instead, she sat in the back pew during the morning service, sunglasses on, head low. When the pastor spoke of justice and humility, his voice cracked once. Jasmine felt it like a bruise. Later that evening, she stopped by her father's old house. It was quiet now, just a few pieces of furniture and a chair that still creaked when you sat in it. She didn't turn on the lights. She just sat by the window, phone on silent, and stared at the street. Sometimes power collapses in fire. Sometimes it just slips out the back door and leaves you holding its shadow. She thought of Dugan, and for the first time since the hearing, she whispered aloud to the room, "You didn't have to go like that." But maybe she did. Maybe that's how the truth works. It doesn't demand an ending. It just forces a choice. Jasmine had made hers. Now the world would have to decide what to do with it. The sky over Washington was still dark when Jasmine unlocked her office door. She didn't need to be there that early. No meetings scheduled, no cameras waiting, no emergencies brewing. But sleep hadn't come, and the silence of morning was safer than the noise of praise. She stepped inside alone, set her coffee on the desk, and let the light from the window spill across the floor like a question no one had asked yet. The room smelled faintly of paper and peppermint. Her chief of staff hadn't arrived. No footsteps echoed in the hallway. The Capitol felt like a ghost of itself before 7 a.m. Clean, quiet, unfinished. That's when she saw it. A single white envelope sat in the center of her desk. No name on the outside, no markings, just paper. Clean, unassuming, a pale rectangle of unknown weight. Taped beside it was a yellow sticky note in her chief of staff's handwriting. Found this in the drop slot, no return address. She stared at it for a few seconds without moving. Her mind flicked through possibilities. Press, protesters, threats, thanks. But something about its stillness, its lack of anything performative, felt different. She picked it up gently, as if the paper might say something before she even opened it. She broke the seal. The letter inside was handwritten, blue ink on soft-lined paper. Careful cursive, measured spacing. It looked old-fashioned, like someone who didn't trust typing with thoughts that mattered. She read the first line, and her breath caught before she could stop it. "I know this won't change anything," it began, "but I need you to know I saw it now, not in the courtroom, in your silence." It wasn't signed yet, but Jasmine already knew. Judge Hannah Dugan. She sat down, letter still in hand, and kept reading. "I believed I was helping people," it continued. "That's what I told myself. That's what I told others. But when I watched myself through your eyes, when you made me see it, I realized I wasn't serving justice. I was choosing comfort, familiarity. I had created my own version of fairness, and I convinced myself it was truth." Jasmine leaned forward, elbows on the desk, eyes never leaving the paper. "I didn't see how much I had edited the law until you held the mirror steady. When I opened that hallway for Luis Ortega, I told myself it was compassion. Maybe it was. But where was that door when the poor came through? When the unknown came through? When no one reminded me of someone I used to know? There were no flourishes, no self-pity, no branding, just the kind of clarity that comes after everything else has fallen away." Jasmine swallowed hard and kept reading. "You didn't break me in that hearing. You didn't need to. You made me look at what I'd built and who I'd locked out of it. I never hated the law. I just got used to deciding when it should bend. And that's not mercy. That's ego dressed as grace." Jasmine looked up for a moment, letting the words hang in the room like smoke. Then she looked back down and finished it. "You were right. Power doesn't belong to people. It belongs to the people. And I forgot that." There was a pause between the final lines, like Dugan had stopped writing and breathed before continuing. "I won't ask for forgiveness. I'm not owed that. But I hope someday we build better doors." That was it. No signature, no date, just ink, just truth. Jasmine held the letter in her hands for a long time, her eyes fixed on the last line. She could hear the hum of the Capitol waking up, footsteps outside, phones ringing, the clatter of morning routines. But inside her office, the silence remained untouched. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She folded the letter once, carefully, and slid it into the second drawer of her desk. the one where she kept her oath of office and an old photo of her father. In it, he wore a city bus driver's uniform and a tired smile. He used to say the law was something built by people who never had to ride in the back. She reached into the drawer, touched the edge of the photo, then closed it softly. Dugan had been right about one thing. Justice wasn't loud. It wasn't fast. It didn't come with applause. It came in silence. And in that silence, Jasmine felt something settle. Not peace, but purpose. She rose, rolled her shoulders back, and reached for her notebook. There was work to do. Better doors to build. It began, like most revolutions in Washington, with a draft. Jasmine sat alone in her office that evening. Long after the halls had emptied, the cleaners had come and gone, and even the lights of the Capitol dome flickered under the pressure of night. A soft desk lamp cast a golden circle across the pile of handwritten notes, policy printouts, and legal briefs scattered before her like puzzle pieces without borders. The letter from Judge Dugan remained in her drawer, unopened since the morning she'd read it, but its words echoed all around her. I hope someday we build better doors. That sentence wouldn't let go. She had seen what a courtroom could become when discretion lost its boundaries. She had witnessed what silence could do when wrapped in authority. The question now wasn't whether Hannah Dugan had failed. That was done. The question was how many others were doing the same, and how many systems made that failure not an exception, but a pattern. That's what this moment demanded, not punishment, reform. So she began. She called it the Equal Access and Justice Act, not because it was poetic, but because it was plain, unmistakable. The law would do three things. First, it would require all federal and state-level judges who exercise non-standard discretion in sentencing, dismissal, or post-trial relief to report those decisions to a public transparency board. Second, it would establish a real-time audit system that flagged disparities in treatment, not just by race or income, but by affiliation, connection, or deviation from precedent. And third, most controversially, it would initiate independent ethics reviews of sealed or undocumented court proceedings involving defendants connected to the judiciary or prosecution through prior professional networks. No one had proposed anything like it, and that's why she knew the knives were coming. The moment the bill was submitted for committee review, the temperature changed. Her office lines jammed with angry calls from state judicial associations. Columnists accused her of wanting to chain judges to a calculator. One former appellate judge told NPR that Jasmine was trying to algorithm away the soul of justice. But she didn't flinch, because she'd already seen what happened when that soul went unchecked. She remembered the clerk's voice on the recording. She did it because she owed them. She remembered Dugan's own confession. I thought I was serving justice. I was serving myself. She remembered Luis Ortega and the thousands like him who never had a hallway to slip out through. So she wouldn't walk it back. Still, the resistance was louder than she expected. From the left came concern about judicial independence. From the right came open hostility. A few lawmakers who had praised her courage after the hearing now sent quiet emails urging her to slow it down, rethink the language, or worse, let this moment breathe. They told her not to push a bill so soon, that people needed time. But Jasmine knew the truth. Delay was a weapon, and silence, once again, was the accomplice. So she did what she always did when the noise got too loud. She went back to the district. Houston's streets welcomed her with familiar humidity and cracked sidewalks. At the corner of 4th and Main, she visited a nonprofit immigration center where Luis Ortega's wife now volunteered. The woman hugged Jasmine tight, eyes full but dry. They sent him back, she said simply, but he made it safely. He said to tell you thank you. He said you were the only one who saw him. Jasmine didn't respond. She just held her hand and nodded. Then she went to the Black Law Students Association at her old alma mater and read the first page of her bill aloud. When she looked up, a young woman raised her hand and asked, "Congresswoman, how will you stop them from bearing it in committee?" Jasmine smiled. "I won't ask," she said. "I'll bring it to the floor." On the day of the proposal, the Capitol was packed. The gallery was full. Press credentials had run out by noon. Outside, demonstrators on both sides held signs. some accusing her of trying to federalize fairness, others lifting placards that read, "Equal access now and doors for all." The chamber lights were harsh but clear. Jasmine stood at her desk in the center of the House floor, flanked by pages holding printed copies of the bill. She wore a navy blazer, no jewelry, and the pin her father used to wear when he drove bus route 55 down 3rd Ward. She pressed the button on her desk mic, and then she spoke. "Madam Speaker," she began, "I rise not just on behalf of my constituents, but on behalf of every American who has sat in a courtroom and wondered why the law bends for some, but never for them." The room was still, not quiet from disinterest, but from focus. "This bill," she said, lifting the first page, "is not a punishment for judges. It is a promise to the people, a promise that justice will no longer hide behind sealed doors, familiar names, or polite favors. It is a promise that we will no longer confuse discretion with favoritism, that we will no longer allow relationships to weigh more than records, that the courtroom will return to what it was meant to be, a public square, not a private corridor." She paused just long enough for her words to settle. "I want every American, regardless of race, income, or affiliation, to walk into court and know one thing: the rules will not shift because someone knows someone. The judge will not lean back in favor because they shared law school professors. The sentence will not shrink because the name is familiar." A rustle from the Republican side. She kept going. "I know some of you are afraid of this bill," she said, "afraid of what it asks us to face. But the only people who fear transparency are those who've lived too long without it." That one hit. A few lawmakers flinched. She delivered the final blow with the same quiet strength that had carried her through the hearing. "This isn't just about what happened in one courtroom. It's about what happens in too many, and what happens when the people lose faith that the law is theirs too." She folded the bill. She stepped back. No theatrics, no smile, just truth. The applause didn't come right away, but then from the gallery someone rose, then another, and slowly they clapped. No roar, just a rising pulse of hands meeting in steady, deliberate rhythm. Below the chamber in a small courthouse in Milwaukee, a woman who used to be a judge watched the live stream from her kitchen. Her hands were wrapped around a coffee mug that had long gone cold. And when Jasmine's voice rang out for the last time, "One law, one door, for everyone," she nodded, not as a judge, but as a citizen, as one of the people. As the final echoes of applause faded from the chamber, the world began to breathe again, but not in relief. It was something deeper, something heavier. The sound wasn't just in honor of a speech, it was in recognition of a truth too long buried. Jasmine Crockett stood still at the edge of the floor, not soaking in praise, but carrying the weight of everything that had brought her to that microphone. A broken system, a crumbling bench, a judge who thought she was saving justice while feeding her own reflection. But when the cameras powered down and the crowds filtered out, what remained was not policy, it was clarity. And with that came the question every nation must ask itself, in the quiet after reckoning: what did we learn? The answer didn't fit in headlines or hashtags. It lived in the spaces no one wrote about. The crack in Judge Dugan's voice, the stillness in Jasmine's hands, the breath caught in every throat when silence fell heavier than thunder. The lesson was not that justice could be restored with a vote or a speech. It was that justice had to be watched by everyone all the time, because the moment we stop looking is the moment power starts choosing itself. The first lesson was this: compassion without accountability becomes favoritism, and favoritism in the hands of power becomes a weapon. Judge Hannah Dugan did not set out to become unjust. She didn't wake up with malice in her heart. She believed in mercy. She believed in helping people. But what she failed to see, what Jasmine forced her and the country to confront, is that when mercy is given selectively, it is no longer mercy at all. It is bias disguised in kindness. It is power disguised as empathy. And it breaks the very thing it was meant to protect. The human truth was simple. A system built on rules cannot survive if those who enforce them feel entitled to break them for the people they like. The second lesson was harder. It was about silence. Not the loud, dramatic kind, but the silent kind. The slow erosion of oversight, the quiet passing of privilege, the shrug of a courtroom door opening for one man while slamming shut on another. Dugan's silence wasn't just in the hearing. It had lived in her courtroom for years, in her sealed decisions, in her unreported favors, in the names she didn't remember because they didn't remind her of anyone she knew. And that silence, left unchecked, had become a structure, a hallway, a gate, built for the familiar, guarded against the forgotten. That was the world Jasmine walked into when she sat in that hearing chair. She didn't just face one woman, she faced a culture that teaches us to excuse power when it's polite, that teaches us to call injustice an exception, that tells us to keep quiet when the people who break the rules are the ones who wrote them. She refused, and in doing so, she uncovered the third and most painful lesson. Justice is not fragile, but truth is. Truth doesn't explode. It erodes. It erodes under the pressure of denial, of delay, of comfort. And when it does, people stop believing. They stop filing complaints. They stop reporting wrongs. They stop entering the courtroom expecting fairness. They stop voting. They stop hoping. But Jasmine gave them something else. Not a happy ending, a hard one. And hard truths, when told out loud, can become bridges. They can become blueprints. They can become laws. The message at the center of it all, the one that cracked a judge, passed a bill, and moved a country, was not complicated. It was this: the law cannot be personal. It cannot be given in exchange for a favor or withheld because of fear. It cannot be shaped by guilt or memory or old friendships hiding behind black robes. It must be consistent. It must be seen. And it must be earned. Justice is not a feeling. It is a door. And if it does not open the same way for everyone, then it is not a door. It is a wall. That was the message. And Jasmine carried it with her, not as a speech, but as an oath, because she knew what it had cost. She had felt the pressure to stay silent. She had walked into the fire of backlash. She had watched allies distance themselves, pundits distort her name, and old friends warn her to be careful. But she did not bend, because truth without courage is just a whisper, and courage without truth is just noise. What she showed the world, what she reminded the country, is that dignity does not come from position. It comes from purpose. And power, when stripped of ego, can still serve, if it chooses to. In the months that followed, as her bill worked its way through the committee system and ethics boards reevaluated long-buried cases, Jasmine didn't give another speech. She didn't publish a memoir. She didn't sit for every interview. Instead, she visited courtrooms, small ones, forgotten ones. She listened to public defenders, to single mothers on benches, to translators trying to explain bond conditions in languages no one else in the room spoke. She didn't need applause. She needed perspective. Because the real work always was not in the moment the door swings open. It was in making sure it stayed open. For everyone. And maybe someday a future lawmaker would sit in that same chamber, decades from now, and read her words again. Not to remember the fall of a judge, but to remember what rose in its place. A principle, a standard, a promise, that justice is not what we feel, it is what we choose. Every single time we walk through that door and make sure no one is left behind. And now the weight of that promise shifts off the page, off the floor of Congress, and into the hands of everyone listening. Because justice doesn't end with a gavel strike. It begins with the people who hear it and decide what to do next. Jasmine Crockett did not step into that hearing room to be applauded. She stepped in to draw a line, to remind a country drunk on comfort that silence is not neutral and compassion without scrutiny is still corruption. She exposed a rot so quiet it had learned to sound like mercy. And then she stood in front of the nation and said, "No more." But that moment is not enough if it stays frozen in headlines, if it is not followed, if it is not demanded. So now the door she pried open must become yours to walk through. If you believe that the law should not favor the connected over the voiceless, then speak, not someday. Now write to your representatives. Demand transparency in your courts. Demand auditability in your justice system. Ask the questions no one wants to answer. Who gets mercy in your town? Who gets silence? If you believe that judges must be held to the same standard they enforce, then fight. Demand public tracking of judicial outcomes. Demand that discretion be a tool of fairness, not favoritism. Show up to town halls. Show up to hearings. Be the eyes that systems fear. And if you believe, truly, that power must belong to the people, not hover above them, then act, not with rage, but with resolve, not with spectacle, but with stamina. Run for school board, join legal aid, vote in the off years when no one is watching. Teach your children that justice is not a symbol, it is a responsibility. Jasmine walked through fire so you wouldn't have to, but that fire is not gone. It burns in every sealed courtroom, every unrecorded deal, every hallway that only opens for the familiar. And the only thing that will extinguish it is you. You who refuse to look away. You who demand a system not built on favors, but on fairness. You who understand that real justice is not what happens when someone powerful falls, but what rises in its place. So don't wait for another story like this one. Write the next one with your voice, your vote, your vigilance, because the door is open now. The question is, who will walk through it? Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.